may not be suitable for all audiences.
Because, Bert, this is the best story ever written.
Oh, terrific. Read it for me.
Art 101 with Mr. Burgher.
So today we're going to take a quick look at some artwork by Giacometti. Really cool exhibition exhibit that's here at Kansas City. So let's jump right in and take a look. The Swiss sculptor, painter, printmaker that would create his works in Paris from 1922 onward until his passing in 1966 was this tireless visionary Alberto Giacometti. He began his career as a post-impressionist, and he would grow to be one of the most important sculptors of the 20th century, influencing Cubism, Surrealism, and beyond. As a matter of fact, he worked as a Surrealist, but was removed from the Surrealist movements by other members for not conforming to their ideas in the 1930s. But be that as it was, he was a very learned sculptor studying under the sculptor Antoine Bourdelle, who had worked with in some capacity Rodin, and he would take that knowledge and move forward with various ideas and artworks, as we will see as we move forward here. Now, he was also an artist that was not without his criticisms, and he was very self-critical by nature. I guess I would go as far as to say he was plagued by self-doubt about his art, and he felt that he was unable to do justice to his artistic visions. This scrutiny of his own work would motivate him to improve himself, and he would do this continuously throughout his entire life, famously restarting and destroying the artworks that he felt were inadequate to his standard. Now, the fact of his self-criticism is very exemplified by the fact that he was making his work up until about 1925-ish, and the faces and the art became too hard for him. He couldn't overcome this self-doubt. He felt that he just couldn't do it, and so he just plain out quit making artwork. It took about 10 years off. And after those 10 years off, he began to reevaluate his approach to making art, trying to view it more as a very long exercise to understand what he sees, as opposed to getting completely wound up and tight about the perfection of each individual piece, but looking at it more as a marathon than a sprint, so to speak. Regardless of the type of work that he was focusing on, the canvas or the sculpture was simply a means to better understand what he sees, as opposed to other motivating factors that other artists may have.
What does that mean?
It means exactly as I have said. I do not lie about what I see, King Ragnar.
After World War II, his focus began to go to the elongated figures. Not only were these sculpted, but also painted. These paintings are only a small part of the entire catalog of the artworks that he had created, but it's interesting to note that after 1957, his figurative paintings were much more a part of these exhibitions in his artwork collections than ever before, and as much a part of his work portfolio as his sculptural works at that time.
When you know you're doing what you're meant to do, you have to try.
For Giacometti, art was not just his own thing, but it was a bit of a family affair. His brother Diego, who lived right next door to his studio, was also his most trusted associate, as well as a muse model of sorts, posing for both his very first works and his very last work, and also very much work as an artist in his own, as well as another brother, Bruno, who was an architect. And so the boys, as well as other siblings, were encouraged by their father, Giovanni, who was a post-impressionist sort of painter, and their chosen godfather, who was Kuno Amet, a Fauvist painter as well, all encouraging and teaching and helping them advance in their pursuit of artistic endeavors.
Nah, it's not funny, I've got school. Nah, I'm not laughing, I've got school.
as the old adage goes, to be a starving artist is no way to live, but Giacometti definitely looked the part of the starving artist. He was very well known and wealthy, although he definitely chose to live in a state of poverty. He did not really trust banks and things like that, so he was known for having wads of cash and things like that under his bed. He was known for visiting brothels quite frequently, having some display of interaction with known criminals and kind of this underculture of Paris life. Even though he was married, he would decide to get his wife a apartment by herself off on her own, and he didn't really like to visit her, didn't like to go out there and whatever, so he would take care of her and say, there you go, you're all set up, and just kind of do his own art thing and live the way he chose to live. And some of that was due to the fact that he was reluctantly married in the first place. Again, his wife Annette was involved with those early sorts of things, but their marriage was somewhat of a formality. Now in his 60s, he would meet a 20-year-old something or other named Caroline, and they had met, and he was instantly taken, and she became a muse of his, sitting for 20 to 30 portraits or so of various media, and he was quite obsessed with her at the end of his life. But he would never, despite any relationship or whatever, would never let creature comforts of life get in the way of his vision of what artistic perfection should be. He lived in a little room off of his studio, and he loved being there, and the bathroom in the studio apartment thing didn't even have a toilet. It was just a hole in the ground that he used, and in order to take his showers, he would have the shower over the hole, so he'd have to put a board down over that hole so he could stand there and take his shower. And that's how he lived. He just lived in this state of poverty, not because he didn't have the money to do better or do something different, but he felt that that lifestyle kept him hungry. It kept him moving. It's kind of like, if you're familiar with the Rocky series, Rocky Balboa comes from nothing and becomes the great champion, and then with millions of dollars, his lifestyle makes him soft, and he has to go back to a state of poverty to become tough again. Well, Giacometti worked and lived very much this way too. His lifestyle made him hungry and hard as an artist, as opposed to being soft by a certain lifestyle or way of life. I mean, by the 1950s, he was one of the best known artists in the world living in poverty. Side note, although Giacometti would work on very traditional art media, he would basically draw or create out of anything. Scraps of mail, newspaper, garbage laying around his studio, it didn't matter. If he was in the mood to create, he was going to create on whatever was at hand.
Is this something he normally does?
Damn right!
When he would do a work, whether we're talking about something sculpture or a work of a painting type, Alberto Giacometti would approach each day from a brand new perspective, a brand new start, even though it was the exact same canvas. So he would work on top of his work over and over and over again, which is why a lot of times we see this very, very dark figure, the very worked out portrait, despite the background just kind of being sketched in there. Each setting, each day of looking at that subject, a reworking of that portrait, a reconstruction of his vision of what the work should be. And it was his argument that works were always in a state of work. Nothing was ever really finished. And it was always about that idea of focusing on his vision, focusing on what he sees to create that perfect vision of what he was making, and that exercise of doing such. And he would go on to say, to a certain extent, everybody is an artist reinventing stories. The fact of telling a story gives the story a reality. And that's basically where he's at. He's trying to tell his story. He's going through the actions of the work to make that story come to life. And he was very much fascinated by stories of the past. We see this in his works that are very much influenced by the ancient works in Egypt, specifically their sculptural works. And we see over and over and over again this work, an ancient sort of quality, a Egyptian influence that's kind of embedded in there. Side note, in 1938, Giacometti was hit by a car and permanently injured, and this reduced his own ability to stride, and he had a permanent limp the rest of his life.
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
And these facts definitely lay out the reasons why Giacometti is one of the most influential 20th century sculptors, and why students need to be familiarized with artists just like him, who weren't about trying to live some sort of flashy life. They weren't trying to do some wacky reality TV show or whatever the heck we do here on social media. He's just doing his thing as an artist. He broke into it big time, and he stayed humble, and he stayed hungry, and he stayed active and working, not for glitz and glamour, but because that's what his drive was to do, and the story that he needed to tell required him to be the way that he was, and hopefully we can appreciate him, if nothing else, but for that. Hopefully that was enjoyable for you. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and interact. See you next time.
I just played the background and kicked it, and I was like, I catch him, at a swap meet or something.